An estimated 2 billion tons of waste generated by humans annually constitute a huge burden on the Earth's ecosystem. By the end of the 16th century, the problem was already a persistent one. Marlowe's Edward II, for example, featured a conspicuous recurrence of sewage and hazardous waste exposure. Now, what actually distinguishes waste from remains and ruins in the literature of the period can sometimes be a vexed issue. This presentation is part of a bigger project which aims at exploring what was then seen in Shakespeare as waste on the one hand and ruins and remains on the other, and how they were trashed, discarded, or, on the contrary, preserved and cherished. So I'd like to ask how the playwright explores the tension between the impermanence of valuable remains and the permanence of deleterious ones, and if there's a useful theoretical concept which could enable us to deal with waste, ruins, and remains at the same time. The word ruin in the OED is primarily defined as the state or condition of collapse or downfall. Remarkably, in Shakespeare, where the word appears only 6 times, this decay is seldom natural. In other words, it is not so much due to the result of time as to some political upheaval. The bare ruined choirs of Sonnet 73 are the result of Henry VIII's dissolution of monasteries. In Julius Caesar, Antony describes Caesar's body in Act 3, Scene 1 as the ruins of the noblest man that ever lived the tide of times. Caesar's corpse here literalizes the breakdown of the distinction between subject and object. It is objectified, so to speak. Ruins in the early modern English imagination therefore seem to be inextricably linked to violence and human destruction. As a result, they generally triggered both a sense of nostalgia and a longing for preservation. It is probably worth noting that one of the meanings of waste actually coincided with the idea of destruction emphasized by ruins. In Henry V, the king refers to waste and desolation. Waste here refers to destruction or devastation caused by war. However, in its more frequent acceptance, waste is not the product of intentional violence. Rather, it is the result of neglect, and it is narrowly intertwined with ideas of uselessness. A waste in the early modern period was first and foremost an uncultivated country. In John Manwood's treatise of the law of the forest, the word waste and its derivatives appear no less than 34 times. Manwood explains that a waste is most properly where any man doth cut down his own woods within the forest, without license of the king or of the Lord Chief Justice in eye of the forest. So wastes are clearly forbidden. Interestingly, and as you like it, Jaques makes it clear that Orlando mars the forest's trees. In other words, Orlando makes spoil or waste of the woods and should be punished for it. This type of waste is to be paralleled with another category of wastes, since the Forest of Arden is repeatedly depicted as a desert place. Orlando refers to this desert inaccessible when he discovers Arden. John Florio's definition of the term desert shows that desert lands were generally perceived as wastes by Shakespeare's contemporaries. However, the forest being a multi-layered space, seen through the distorting prism of the characters' changing moods, it is hard to decide whether Arden is a truly derelict third territory or a perfectly managed forest zone under royal jurisdiction. Now, waste material would also point to trash and garbage. Trash, as we know it today, was already an issue in 16th century England. John Shakespeare's Muckhill Fine in 1552, be it a waste disposal toll or a punishment, is often reminded by environmental scholars. Twelfth Night's Illyrian setting, it seems to me, aligns with such preoccupations and enabled the playwright to express some contemporary anxieties about energy, health, environmental and geopolitical issues. It works as an experimental English outpost contaminated by pollution, invaded by commercial goods. With its unhealthy atmosphere, Illyria exemplifies the malodorous cities of the Anthropocene, fashioned by human covenants and anthropic activities. Significantly, as a foreign visitor, Sebastian is intrigued by the relics of the town. While he first probably means the memorials and the things of fame that do renown the city, it is hard to imagine that, as he resorted to this particular word, Shakespeare did not have in mind some satirical allusion to the commerce of relics, which also happened to be tourist attractions in the Catholic states of the early modern era. Furthermore, when he uses the word relics, Sebastian may also, consciously or not, think of the wasting away that characterizes the place. Since the 14th century, relics have designated that which remains or is left behind, especially after destruction or wasting away, the remains or remaining fragments of a thing. In Twelfth Night, this rhetoric of waste has often been obliterated by critics, perhaps because, as Claire Larocque explains, repression and denial have long contributed to the unrepresentability of junk and garbage. So ruins evoke a sense of mourning that waste and garbage cannot arouse. They are also meant to endure as permanent traces of destruction, while waste and garbage are bound to be scattered, disregarded, displaced. My contention is that remains, ruins, and waste were all parts of an aesthetics of abjection, a term which literally means the state of being cast off. Kristeva's understanding of the abject in the powers of horror provides indeed a helpful term to contrast to Lacan's object of desire. Obviously, the presence of ruins, remains, and trash in early modern drama tells us much on the apprehension of death and on the disturbance of identity that resulted from daily violence, destruction, and decay. Drama is a means of coping with the abject, of course. In the next step of my project, I would like to suggest that recycling was in fact yet another means of dealing with it and of transcending the boundaries between subject and abject. When Hamlet famously explains that Polonius is not eating, but is being eaten by worms in Act 4, Scene 3, he points to the biodegradability of corpses. As a result, dead bodies remain and disappear at the same time, since they become something else. With this in mind, I intend to explore the becoming of texts or textual bodies, once achieved. French philosopher Jacques Derrida once said, "Is it not the case that, as non-biodegradable, the singularity of a work resists, does not let itself be assimilated, but stays on the surface and survives like an indestructible artifact, or in any case one which is less destructible than another?" It need hardly be said that Shakespeare's work, its singularity, has resisted this assimilation or biodegradation. There are journals, conferences, academic books that reinscribe his name repeatedly in their titles in the name of environmental justice. This reinscription or reentitling is obviously a counterforce, a resistance to the erasures of all sorts that are happening elsewhere. Thank you very much.